Hello everyone, this will be the reading of A Circus Makes For a Good Show, written by idontknowwhattoshipsendhelp, and read by the author, yours truly. Summary: Mihawk is bored in East Blue. What's better to entertain him than a floating circus? Especially the clown. This is a one-shot. It is Buggy slash Mihawk. There are no archive warning applying here. To say Mihawk was unimpressed would be an understatement. He was absolutely bored out of his mind. Really, what was Shanks thinking, bragging about East Blue and insisting he just had to go? Just because he adopted a child in the most boring blue didn't mean Mihawk had to. And yet here he was, in East Blue, floating around on his coffin boat with no real destination in mind. He was too weak to promises of good wine. Shanks had better get twice as many bottles as he'd said. So here he was, the strongest swordsman in the weakest blue, hoping to find something, anything, to ease his boredom. He heard loud noises in the distance and decided to head towards it. Whatever it was had got to be at least entertaining, right? To make that much noise here. The sound cleared and untangled as he got closer to the source, the red dot in the distance growing as he could now differentiate a mix of music, cheers, and a roar. He got closer and closer, and the closer he got, the more he thought, am I hallucinating? Because why would there be a circus on a boat in the ocean? He expected this kind of thing in paradise or the New World, but here in East Blue? His curiosity got the best of him and he couldn't resist boarding the boat. He noticed the pirate flag with a clown nose on top of the mast and elected to ignore it. He doubted any East Blue pirate would be able to defeat him anyways. He got closer to the tent and slowly lifted the curtain to reveal a full circus show. An acrobat, a clown, probably the captain of the ship if the nose was right, and a lion? They had a lion? Yes, Mihawk decided. This may not be a new child or good wine, but it is entertaining. Not that he'd say so to the performers. He had an image to maintain. He got a glass of wine and sat, observing silently as the performers, performed. Most seemed to not notice him, but three of them did. The man on the unicycle, the clown, most likely the captain, seeing as the man on the unicycle juggling swords looked to him when he noticed his presence, and the lion. Really, why did the lion have better awareness than most of this crew? How had they survived until now? Probably because they were in East Blue. The clown bowed towards him when the show ended, keeping his eyes on him the whole time. At least he wasn't so dumb as to look away from a stranger on his ship. Hawkeye Mihawk, the clown stated, why are you here? He would have answered if he wasn't as perplexed about it as the clown. Well, no use lying about it now. Someone offered me wine if I spent a month traveling on the East Blue. The clown snorted, a quite vulgar sound. I hope it's good wine, the clown started. And what brings you here, specifically, on my wonderful ship? His voice took a threatening undertone as Mihawk raised an eyebrow. Was an East Blue pirate challenging him? Really? This was an entertaining day after all. I came for the show, was his answer, hoping it would satisfy the clown. It did. Oh, he exclaimed, so you've heard about my wonderful circus show and decided to have a look for yourself. He smiled brightly, clearly happy at getting recognition. Well, what do you think? he questioned. It was quite entertaining. The swordsman gave, hoping it would be enough for the clown. He really should learn his name if only to tell Shanks about him. The red-nosed man's smile got even bigger at his admission. That's high praise coming from a man such as yourself. He nodded his head, satisfied. All right, let's party until dawn, he yelled at his crew, and the circus cheered back before breaking into even bigger tricks. The clown got him good wine from a small floating restaurant he would have to visit, and they drank themselves into oblivion. So much so that Mihawk woke up naked with the clown whose name he still hadn't caught but couldn't quite ask for now. He really would have to find out later. Cuddled on his right, seemingly very comfortable. He took the time to properly look at the man, taking in his now clean face and soft blue hair, raking fingers through them softly. He could get used to this, he thought as the other's eyes fluttered open. Good morning, he said casually, hoping his voice didn't betray the slight nervousness and excitement he felt. Morning, the clown drawled back, before having a double take at Mihawk, whose eyes crinkled in slight amusement. A blush crept up and shaded his cheeks red as he opened and closed his mouth in disbelief. How? The clown exclaimed, clearly not remembering the previous night either. He seemed to realize how his shock could be interpreted and brought his hands up between them, gesticulating as he talked. Not I would say no, but how? He asked again, the blush now creeping up to his ears and down his neck with embarrassment. Mihawk chuckled, earning a slight glare with no real heat behind it. You didn't even buy me dinner first, the man pouted, and oh, Mihawk thought it was cute. Let me make this right then. Given the opportunity, I would love to get to know you better, he spoke. He got up and rummaged through his coat, getting a piece of paper and a pen out of the inside pocket. This is my den number, Mihawk said, handing it to the other man before putting his clothes back on. He turned back right before leaving the room for his boat. Call me. Buggy was freaking out. Dracula Mihawk, the strongest swordsman on the sea, Hawkeyes, had visited his floating circus, deemed it entertaining enough not to cut it, and then got drunk with him and slept with him. Maybe he's hallucinated. That would be more probable, but the paper resting carefully in his hand said otherwise. Buggy had gotten Mihawk's den number. He had to admit, the man was a sight. His wanted poster really did him no justice, and Buggy could appreciate a good-looking man and good-mannered man. Because yes, Mihawk had ignored the code and simply boarded his ship, but also he'd been polite with Buggy and hadn't mentioned his nose at all. The last part gave him more points than it probably should. He got out of bed in a daze, keeping the paper on him until he could transcribe it properly, and escaped from his room, noting he'd have to clean the sheets before going to bed later, or at least change them. His men howled at him and whistled as he walked on the deck, his glare rendered useless by the red staining his cheeks. He should have taken the time to put on his makeup, but he was impatient to put the number in a safe space instead of leaving it laying around in his room. He went straight to the communication room, ignoring the looks Kabaji and Moji gave him as he passed by. Even Richie seems to give him a look. He was a grown man. He could sleep with whoever he wanted. Not that he did it. Turns out not a lot of people are into clowns and red noses. He inputted his number in the book with multiple other numbers on the first page, personal dendans of people he was close with. He could consider them close, right? There were only a few people on this page. Shanks's number on top, followed by Kabaji and Moji's personal Denden numbers he'd gotten for them. Zeph from the Barretier, who he could consider an acquaintance at least, and now Mihawk. Buggy really needed more friends. Speaking of, he decided this would be the perfect time to get a bit of revenge on the red-haired menace that was his best friend. He took the closest Denden to him, strapping a white one on just to be sure, and entered the number he knew by heart. He had to call once, twice, thrice to finally get an answer. This better be important because it's way too early for me to be awake. Shanks growled as the Denden morphed to mimic his face. Is that how you greet an old friend? Bucky couldn't help but grin at his friend's misery. Serve him right for partying all night. He'll just ignore how he did the same. At least he could still wake up at a reasonable hour afterward. Shanks's face cleared immediately and a large smile overtook it. Buggy! He exclaimed. It's rare for you to call me first. Not in trouble now, are you? Buggy could hear the hint of worry under the red-haired joking tone. No, no, nothing of the sort. He waved away his friend's worries. Oh? Shanks inquired, his curiosity taking over. What could have my good friend so excited he had to call me first thing in the morning? He grinned teasingly, and Buggy questioned his choices to call the other slightly. Well, he started slowly, someone said I'd never be able to score big in the romance field. I've called to set the record straight. The choked noise Shanks made was worth everything. Puggy! You've met someone? Who is it? Do I know them? He questions, eyes sparkling through the Denden. Maybe? Buggy's eyes softened slightly at his friend's positivism and obvious protectiveness. Someone unexpected is visiting in the East Blue. He wondered how long it would take Shanks to realize it was Mihawk. He knew the two were sparring partners, and no one else would bribe the swordman to visit East Blue of all places with wine. He wondered if Mihawk knew he and Shanks were acquainted. Someone unexpected? The red-haired voice shook him out of his thoughts. Someone who would never set foot here if not for bribery, he hinted. He rejoiced as the Shanks Denden's expression looked pensive, then horrified. No, Shanks said. Yes, Buggy said. Mihawk! Shanks yelled, and Buggy had to back away from the poor snail. How? Because everyone with eyes could tell Mihawk is handsome, and Shanks knew his personality, which didn't seem like one that would fit well with his own at a glance. That's what I said, Buggy laughed. We got drunk, and now I have one more phone number and a promise of dinner. He stated proudly. What? Shanks yelled somehow louder than he was already screaming. I'll call you later, Bugs! And Buggy heard the telltale ka-chak of the other pirate ending the call. Mihawk was heading towards the general direction he'd heard from Buggy's crewmate, the one with the unicycle, where he could find the Barretier. The wine had been good, and, well, he'd promised Buggy a dinner, but didn't know any of the restaurants in the East, and he doubted Shanks would have any good ideas. His Denden started ringing, and he picked up immediately, hoping the clown would be the one calling him. Mihawk, he greeted. Mihawk! Shanks yelled angrily. Mihawk sighed. Think of the devil, and he shall appear. He took a second to close his eyes, saying goodbye to his peaceful morning before turning back to the snail. Shanks, why are you calling me so early in the morning? He asked, because this was Shanks, and Shanks was not awake in the morning. That was a simple fact of life. The sky is blue, Marines suck, and Shanks sleeps until the afternoon at least. Mihawk, you bastard! Shanks growled, and Mihawk raised an eyebrow. Why would a pirate be mad at him? He even gone to the weakest sea at the man's request. You will have to be more specific, Shanks. Don't pretend you don't know what you did! You slept with Buggy! Mihawks blanked. I did? Shanks screeched, the poor Dandan having trouble imitating the sound. Yes, you did! Did you forget? You better not break his heart, you bastard! Wait. Could it be Buggy? Mihawk stated. Yes, Shanks answered. Buggy the Clown, he clarified. Yes! Oh, if you break his heart, I'll make you wish you were dead, Shanks threatened, and Mihawk had no doubt the man would follow through. And yet, he talked about me? Mihawk couldn't help but notice, a faint blush reddening his ears. Ah! He might have appreciated Shanks' outraged face if he wasn't still stuck on the fact that in a few hours he'd be gone. In the few hours he'd been gone, Buggy had called Shanks to tell him about it. And he'd heard about Buggy. Shanks had gone on more than one drunken rant about how great and amazing and the best friend he was. But Mihawk had thought the man would be sailing on the Grand Line, not in East Blue. He wondered why such a strong man would decide to stay in the weakest blue before deciding it didn't matter. He would ask eventually, but he didn't think it would make much of a difference. Do you know of any good restaurants in East Blue? He chanced. Maybe the red hair calling him could prove to be useful. Ugh! Was the only answer he got before the call disconnected. He stared at the now sleeping snail for a few seconds before putting it away and turning back towards the sea, when the baratier would hopefully be waiting for him. He had to wait a few more hours before he could finally see the floating restaurant coming closer. He trampled down a giddy smile at the idea of finding a place to take Buggy to. Even if the other already knew the restaurant, there weren't a lot of places a pirate could go to eat comfortably. He ducked and made his way inside, being greeted by a little blond boy who gestured toward the more isolated table in the corner without him having to ask. He didn't have to wait long before a man with an impressive mustache walked up to him. He could appreciate good facial hair. Hawkeyes, what brings you to our establishment? The man asked, and Mihawk wondered if everyone he would see in this blue would ask him that question. Couldn't he simply enjoy the things anyone did? I heard your wine is good, he answered anyway, not wanting to offend the cook. That it is, the man boasted. Food is good as well. You gonna eat? He asked and handed him a menu. Mihawk opened it with approval. The design was simple yet elegant. The dishes presented simply and matter-of-factly, yet not treating the client as an idiot. He liked it. He would have to come back if the food was half as good as the presentation. I'll try the elephant tuna, he stated and handed the menu back to the chef, who was still watching him appraisingly. Bring me the best wine to go with it, he added. He sat back and waited patiently, gazing at the sea, letting his thoughts drift to Buggy's hair and eyes and nose. The nose had still been there in the morning, despite the rest of the makeup being gone. Was it real? He hoped it was. It suited the man well. He was dragged out of his thoughts by the blond bus boy, placing the plate in front of him, taking his wine glass and filling it. Are you not too young to be serving wine? He asked, more amused than offended. I'm not! The boy bristled, and Mihawk couldn't help but chuckle. Maybe Shanks was onto something adopting children. Their reaction were entertaining, to say the least. Sanji, don't bother our customers! The chef screamed from the other side of the room, starting the poor boy and making him drop the bottle. Mihawk's reflexes were the only thing that kept it from a sad end on the floor. Shut up, old man! You're the one buttering him! The boy screamed back even louder. It's no trouble, he said. I have to admit I started it this time. The swordsman admitted. Say, young man. He turned back to Sanji, the blond boy eyeing him suspiciously. Do you know any good restaurant one can bring a flashy pirate to eat? Because truly, no word described a clown better than flashy. Sanji's curly brow furrowed and he straightened up. Here, obviously. And really, Mihawk probably should have expected it. You taking a flashy pirate out to eat? The older chef approached his table again, eyes narrowed with more suspicion than when Mihawk had first entered. Wouldn't happen to be Buggy, would it? Mihawk shouldn't be surprised the other had figured it out. Buggy was the one to tell him about this place after all, and he didn't think any other pirate would be as flashy as him in this sea. Yes, there was no use lying. He would most likely bring the men here anyway. You better treat that boy well, the chef threatened. I may not be as swift as I used to, but I know my way with a knife. Mihawk took the threat in stride. Slightly happy someone other than Shanks was looking out for the clown. The blond boy was looking at the cook with his eyes as wide as saucers, glazing at me gaze oops gazing at Mihawk rapidly, eyes darting from one man to the other. May I know your name? Mihawk asked. It's Zeph. I shall remember it. He turned back to his meal, the other two leaving him alone. He finished his meal in peace, satisfied with the quality of the food, paid, and left, promising the chef he'd be back at a later date. The call came later that day. He'd just docked at an island, one that prided itself on its syrup, when his denden started ringing again. This was most likely not Shanks. He promised himself to immediately hang up if it was. Fortunately, it was the man he'd been waiting for. Mihawk. He gave his usual greeting. Mihawk! The denden beamed slightly at the others, scolded his feature. Before the others scolded his features. You owe me dinner. He couldn't help the way his face softened. I do, he agreed. I can pick you up in 2 days? All right, 2 days it is, Buggy agreed. We won't be moving much, but here's my denden number so you can reach me as well. Mihawk fumbled to find the paper and pen he kept in his pocket, being careful noting the numbers, committing them to memory as he wrote them down. He put the denden and paper away after Buggy hung up, now nervous at the idea of taking Buggy on a date. Did pirates date? Was that a common thing? He'd seen some pirate couples, but he'd never really seen them go on dates before. Was he supposed to bring a gift? Should he ask Shanks what Buggy would like? No, definitely not. He would bring a gift, but not one Shanks would tell him to bring. The other would most likely laugh at him and tell him to find something himself anyway. He shook his head and started the climb up the road towards the village. He looked around trying to find something appropriate, but nothing caught his eye. It had to be something flashy to match his date. Nothing else would be good enough. Maybe alcohol? But the other man already had a lot. He was walking down the road, getting further from the village, sightseeing and pondering, when a young boy bumped into his leg. He was running into a lot of children recently, wasn't he? The boy looked up at him from his place on the ground where he'd fallen down, a long nose on a strangely familiar face. He narrowed his eyes in thought. He knew he'd seen a face like this somewhere before. It was right there at the edge of his mind. Still, he bent down to the boy's level. Are you injured, child? He asked, not wanting to hurt a child of all things. The boy spluttered from the ground, eyeing the sword with a wide, terrified, yet curious gaze. I'm not a child. I'm a brave warrior of the sea, just like my dad, he exclaimed proudly on shaky legs. Usopp? Mihawk asked, realizing who the boy was as soon as he mentioned his father being a warrior of the sea. He'd heard the man lament the separation from his son much too often to not know the detail of the few letters they'd managed to exchange by heart. Do you know me? The boy, Usopp, asked. I know your father, he stated simply, and the boy beamed. Did you come to get us? He asked, a slight hop in his legs as he reached forward and grabbed onto Mihawk's coat. The swordsman's brows furrowed slightly at the act, and Usopp seemed to notice. He immediately let go, taking a step back and muttering, Sorry, I am merely visiting, he told him, and the boy's face fell. Can you tell my dad to come get us then? This is big, right? There's got to be someone who can cure Mom. The determined glint in his eye made something soften in Mihawk, and he couldn't help but worry about the last part of the boy's little speech. Is your mother ill? Usopp looked down at his feet. She doesn't want Dad to worry, he admitted, but I sent him letters in secret asking him to send a doctor. I'm sure he's gotten them. He's got to be on his way. Your village doesn't have a doctor. That was worrying. What if someone got injured? It does. That was better for the village, but more worrying for Banchina, as it meant whatever ailed her wasn't coming in the east. He says she can't be cured. He didn't know how to handle the tears welling up in Usopp's eyes as he admitted the doctor's prediction out loud. He cleared his throat slightly. Why don't you take me to her? I am no doctor, but I do some illnesses from other blues. Perhaps I could be of some assistance, he offered. His medical knowledge wasn't the best, but if he could identify some of the symptoms, he may be able to at least relay them to Shanks' doctor, who had yet to mistake any illness for another. The boy nodded and guided him up a little hill topped by a lone house. It wasn't big by any means, a simple design with 2 windows in the front, but the decoration and the quite impressive garden showed off how loved it was regardless. Mom! Usopp yelled excitedly as he pushed the door open with more force than necessary. One of Dad's friends is visiting! Mihawk sighed and shook his head slightly. He and Yasopp were not friends by any means. Acquaintances would be the most he'd be willing to give the other. Reluctant acquaintances. Oh, let's see who it is. The woman smiled at the boy weakly before looking up at him. She tried to sit up, clearly surprised when she recognized him. You're Dracul Mihawk. I recognize you from your wanted poster. I didn't know my poster made it to the East Blue, he admitted, slightly disturbed at the fact. Was that why everyone seemed to know him here? How could they all recognize him so easily? Even on the Grand Line, a lot of people had to take the time to analyze him before deciding if it was him or not. Some were wrong about his identity, regardless. It wouldn't usually, but I like to stay up to date with the bigger bounties in every blue, so I can recognize them if I ever need to. A smart decision. He liked this woman. She had a good head on her shoulders. It would be a shame if she passed. Your son tells me you're sick. Would you allow me to look at your symptoms? I admit I am no doctor, but my experience on the Grand Line has led me to see many things. Perhaps I may be able to recognize what is ailing you, he offered. He half expected to be rejected, honestly. But the woman caved in when she saw the look in her boy's eyes, so full of hope that his mother may heal and survive. The doctor says there is no cure, she told him. But you may do as you wish. Perhaps there is a magic cure somewhere out there we don't know about here. She directed at her son, but the hope in her voice was genuine. This woman knew she was most likely fated to die on this little island, but had no wish to do so. He could see it. She would fight until the very end. Mihawk quickly got to work, asking her questions and prodding at her neck in different areas, trying to listen to her breathing, discerning a slightly wet sound when she did so. It was worrying, but not something he would deem incurable. He didn't say so to the two who looked at him with the twin looks of hope and simply informed them he would consult with a professional before getting back to them. The den then rang once and twice before Shanks answered. "This is Shanks. What's the emergency?" The other man greeted, and Mihawk was not happy to be talking to him so fast after their last discussion. "Shanks, I need to speak to your doctor," he demanded. "And get Yasop, too," he added as an afterthought. The man would most likely want to know his wife was maybe dying. "Mihawk, is everything okay? You better not be dying before you get buggied at that dinner, you hear me? Don't go making him sad," the red hair ordered him, and Mihawk rolled his eyes. "I'm in perfect health. Thank you for worrying. I need to speak to your doctor about someone else. I will only explain it once, so get him and your sniper in hearing range." All right, Shanks gave in, "and I was only worrying for Buggy," he added, even though they both knew it was a lie. It took a few minutes, but he eventually got the go-ahead from the other pirate. "I'm in Syrup Village." He immediately heard Yasub gasp. "Is Husup okay? Is Banshina?" the sniper immediately asked, worried since he'd been summoned with the doctor. "Your son is healthy." Mihawk started with the good news. "Your wife, however, is not doing well." There was no need to beat around the bush. He saw the Denden's face change and tears pool in its eyes. "Was she injured?" Yasop asked pathetically. "She's sick. They say it's incurable, but I'm not so sure. My medical knowledge isn't the best, but I figured we could ask a Grand Line doctor about it," he said. The Denden's face changed again. Of course. He could hear Yasop. He could hear Yasop sob in the background. "Can you tell me her symptoms?" the doctor asked, probably stepping away from the two men so he could have some privacy and less noise keeping him from hearing what Mihawk was about to say. He listed the few symptoms he'd noted and observed: the cough, probably few fluid in her lungs, paleness on the extremities, sunken eyes, and exhaustion. I think I may know what it is. Good news is it's not incurable. Bad news is there's no way for them to heal her in the East. We have to get her to the Grand Line, preferably somewhere they have medical knowledge and medical equipment, like Drum. I can't transport her on my ship. It's much too small for 2 adults and a child." "Call Buggy!" Shanks' voice cut in their discussion. "We'll head for them right now. You take her and the kid and meet us there. Buggy's ship is big enough to transport everyone, you included, Mihawk. As strong as Buggy is, I'd feel better knowing you're with him if you want to cut through the calm belt, which you will do, seeing as carrying a sick woman through Weathers Mountain is not a good idea." "All right," Mihawk agreed and quickly hung up, calling the new number he had engraved in his brain. He would admit he was disappointed he would get to bring Buggy out for dinner yet, but he was excited to see the man again. The snail rang in front of him before he heard the familiar click. "Who dares call Buggy the Clown?" An energetic, an, an energetic voice greeted him. "Buggy," he answered back. "I'm afraid we will have to rain-check our dinner plans." He started, and he saw the snail deflate sadly. "I, of course, still intend on taking you out properly," he clarified, and the snail took its usual form back, albeit frowning a bit. "There's a situation with Yasop's wife. How quickly can you get to Cyber Village? I'll explain when you're here." It would at least give him something to focus on when he faced the other again, giving him more chances of not messing up or looking like a fool. He wanted to impress the man a bit. "We'll be here by midday in 2 days," the clown answered sharply, screaming away from the Dandan speaker, most likely at his crew, to turn the boat around towards his location. "All right, I'll wait for you." "All right, I'll wait for you, Mihawk said before quickly hanging up, not wanting Bucky to see the red on his cheeks as he said it. He turned and walked back the short distance to the house, knocking twice before coming in when Benchina's voice told him to do so. Benchina, Usopp? Mihawk let his eyes rest on each of them for a few seconds. Pack your bags. We will be moving as soon as Buggy's ship arrives, he said, his voice letting them know they simply had no choice. Where are we going? Usopp asked quicker than Benchina, who also had curiosity shining through her eyes. We are going to an island of doctors on the Grand Line. Usopp turned to look at his mother as he said it, eyes shining with love as he looked at her. Her eyes watered as she asked in turn, "Is there really hope for a cure?" "They wouldn't have it here," he answered, letting her know both that yes, there was a potential cure and why they were moving in a simple sentence. She brought a hand up to smooth Usopp's hair back on his head and said with a smile wider than she'd managed in a while, "Go gather your things, Usopp. We're going on an adventure." Usopp was a nervous wreck. He kept breaking into tears, his eyes now redder than they'd been in years with eye bags growing under them. Hunger was hovering over him, trying to force him to just sleep. "Damn it, Usopp, I want to be able to focus on your wife when we get there. I don't need another patient." Shanks felt himself growing more and more wary as they sailed closer to the island, his own anxiety and excitement growing with him. They'd taken a small boat, leaving Ben and most of the crew further on the Grand Line. Only Hongo, Usopp, Rockstar, who wanted to ask Buggy about his information network, and himself on the ship sailing for Drum. The trip that would usually take months was much shorter when one bullied a fast Sea King into pulling your boat. It still took 3 weeks to reach the island, much too long in Shanks' opinion. He was relieved to see Buggy's ship anchored at the harbor. He already knew they had made it. Still, the reassurance of seeing it with his own eyes, it settled a fear inside of him, some tenseness leaving his shoulders. He waited impatiently for them to dock before rushing off the ship, maybe even faster than Usopp, whose wife and son were waiting for him. They all hurried to where he could see Buggy waiting for him further away. "Buggy!" He couldn't help the joy that flashed through him seeing his old friend. There was no one who would ever understand him quite like his best friend. They'd been through everything together, and he knew, no matter what, he would always be there for him. "Back off!" Buggy pushed him away, hands separating from his arms to push him further away. It was good to fall back into. Now, Buggy. It's been so long since we've seen each other," he complained, wrapping an arm around his shoulder and pulling him down, messing with his hair to annoy the other. "We saw each other a few months ago," the other man complained, batting his hands away. "You can have your tea reunion later. Please lead me to my wife." Yasa begged from the side, Hongo watching them amusedly. All right, follow me." He guided them towards the town. "We got here a few days ago, so Kureha has already taken her as her patient. She'll be able to give you more details, but your Banchina will heal, thankfully." Yasop sighed in relief at the news. "Unfortunately," Buggy grinned, "Usopp seems to be quite interested in medicine, and Dr. Kureha is more than happy to teach him about it." Yasa blanched at that, and Shanks laughed. Leave it to the sniper's son to become Dr. Kureha's protege. They reached the house and Buggy gestured them in. "Benchina!" Yesup's broken voice echoed in the room. "Yesup!" He could hear the smile in her voice. She really was an amazing woman. "Oh, Benchina, I'm so sorry." The man's voice turned watery, and Shanks knew the man was crying again. He closed the door and gave them their privacy, turning to search for his friends, as Hongo had already left in search of Dr. Kureha. He found them discussing near the door, Buggy wrapped tightly in a winter coat and Mihawk still refusing to put a shirt on. They did make quite the pair, Shanks had to admit. They did say opposites attract. He slid in next to Buggy and glared at Mihawk for good measure. The man may be his friend, but there was no way he let anyone trying to win over Buggy's heart have an easy time. Shanks, the swordsman greeted, ignoring his glare. Mihawk, he returned with as much emotion in his voice. He turned his attention back to Buggy. So, Bugs, what are your plans now? I assume Kureha will be keeping Banshina here for a while. That I am, boy, and I'm not giving her the secret to my eternal youth. Shanks winced as he heard the doctor's voice. She was so hard to deal with. He'd known her ever since he was a child, and he still hadn't figured her out. Everyone else can leave, especially your sniper being a distraction to my patient. For shame, she declared. Now, Dr. Reen, the man hasn't seen his family in so long. He's not going to leave that easily. Hongo cut into the conversation. As you've guessed, Benchina will be staying on this island for at least a month, and that's if you allow me to stay as well to make sure I can take care of her when she's discharged. Otherwise, she's staying here with Kureha longer, and so is Yasop. The other man had yet to come out of the house. Yasop, a small voice said. Dad's here? Shanks lowered his eyes to a boy who was a copy of Yasop with Benchina's nose. Must be Usopp, he mused. Of course, he said seriously as he lowered himself to the boy's level. He came as soon as he heard she was unwell. The boy's eyes watered and he sniffed pitifully. Mom's gonna be okay and Dad's here? He repeated, and tears fell when Mihawk gave an affirmative. Yasop joined him as the boy started crying, telling Dr. Reen that Banchina had fallen asleep. Is that? He trailed off, almost scared of the answer, and when Usopp looked up towards him, Yasop's tears welled up in his eyes as well. Dad? The boy asked, recognizing his father, even though it had been years since they'd seen each other. Usopp! The older sniper fell to his knees and brought the boy to him in a crushing hug, Usopp reciprocating as hard as his small arms could. Shanks smiled. He could see how lighter Yasop's shoulders were, the man obviously happy now that he was reunited with his family. It had been a suspiciously long time since he'd heard from them. They should have checked on them sooner, and Shanks regretted letting them suffer so much. He knew Yasop must be feeling the same thing tenfold at least. He couldn't imagine what would have happened if Mihawk hadn't coincidentally stopped by syrup. Speaking of, the swordsman looked neutral as ever as he watched the two hug and cry together. He owed him now, didn't he? Shanks cursed inwardly and turned to him. Thank you, Mihawk. He hated having to say those words, no matter how much he wanted to tear out the other's throat for charming Buggy and putting his heart at risk. He was eternally grateful. Does that mean you approve of him now? Buggy asked from the side as the swordman inclined his head in acknowledgement. His teeth grinded. No. Buggy's grin grew even wider. Sounds like a you problem, Shanks. Buggy laughed at Shanks' spout. You're too good for him, Bugs, he complained, hoping maybe if he repeated it enough, his friend would see the truth. You think no one's good enough for me, Red? Buggy rolled his eyes. Especially not him. Come on, Blue. You know I'm right. Just look at him. He motioned to the other's stoic, unmoving face. Exactly. Look at him, Buggy repeated, motioning to his face as well. Shanks pulled his sword out. That's it. Duel me, Mihawk. I'm not giving you Buggy if you can't beat me. Mihawk raised an eyebrow ever so slightly and deadpanned. I have already beaten you more than once, Shanks. He sheathed his sword again. Doesn't matter. You're still not enough. He said my circus was entertaining. Buggy elbowed him, whispering loudly in mock secrecy. He did? Shanks looked between them incredulously. Mihawk actually liked the circus? He hadn't expected that. Maybe they would be better paired than he imagined. Still, he wouldn't let be easy on the other swordsmen. Anyways, Buggy said, we'll be leaving soon. I don't like being on the Grand Line for so long. I stalled to give you time to arrive, but my entire crew's on edge. Shanks deflated slightly. He'd only just arrived. He wanted to spend more time with his friend. But he knew the other had already stayed longer than he would have liked. Hell, coming in the first place had probably been hard on him. He knows how much the clown hates the sea. All right, he said. Do you need anything for the trip back? No, we still have plenty of everything, Buggy confirmed, and Shanks already knew. The man had most likely overpacked when he decided he would make the trip, and he had restocked as soon as he set foot on Drum. When are you leaving? He asked. As soon as possible, the clown answered. He nodded. That meant right after confirming with Kureha he wasn't needed anymore. I'll call Ben and ask if we're needed in a new world for the next month. If we are, yes up, I'm leaving you here and will fetch you when Manchina's done healing, he told Hongo and Yasop, the second still not letting go of his son, holding him up in his arms. He moved away from the group, taking out his personal snail. Shanks. Ben's voice came from the snail as its face changed to match the other man's. Ben, it's been a while, he confirmed. It's been not even a day, Shanks. You called me when you saw a drum in the distance to tell me you'd call me when you got there. Remember? The other rolled his eyes, and Shanks reddened slightly. He might have exaggerated the amount of calls he needed to make to the Red Force, Ben's personal snail. But he was worried for the crew. They hadn't been in the New World for very long, and he didn't want anyone messing with them while he was away and couldn't do anything for them. And he missed Ben. A little voice provided the back of his head. He shook it away to focus back on the discussion he was having. He briefed his first mate on the situation, giving him a brief idea of Manchina's health and confirming they would be good to stay on Drum for the month. Shanks may hitch a ride on a seeking back to the New World eventually, but Yasop and Hongo were clear to stay as long as needed. Anything else, Captain? Ben asked, and no, there wasn't anything else, but Shanks didn't want to hang up yet for some reason. He pretended to think about it for longer than necessary before Mihawk's knowing gaze pierced through him. No, nothing else, he confirmed. Call me if there's anything, Ben, he said, and hung up after receiving a "Of course, Captain," from the other. He saw as Mihawk leaned towards Buggy and talked to him in a low voice, the other then turning towards him, a slightly sadistic grin on his face. So, Buggy said, Shanks hearing the amusement in his voice. How's Ben? He asked and waggled his eyebrows at him. He flushed furiously. Weren't you leaving? He changed the subject, hoping to avoid having to come face to face with the feelings he already knew he had. All right, we're leaving. Buggy raised his hand, letting the subject drop, for now, because Shanks knew the other would tease him about it later. They were finally back in East Blue, and Buggy was drained. He hated the Grand Line so much. Paradise or not, it was a pain to navigate, especially with a crew that was not ready for it. At least Mihawk had stayed with them on the way back as well. He hadn't expected it, seeing as he had his own boat tied to the big top, but the swordsman had insisted he wasn't done touring the East Blue and wanted to finish his tour of it. But he wondered if he'd really visit every island, seeing how bored he'd seemed when he'd first arrived on the ship. He thought it was probably an excuse. He had to admit he felt giddy at the idea of the other making excuses to spend more time with him. Still, he couldn't erase the doubt that kept creeping up his mind. They hadn't done anything at all since that one night, and Buggy had to say he felt slightly disappointed. It wasn't the best time when Banchina was on board, seeing as they had to take care of a child on top of a sick person, and those weren't the best circumstances to set the mood. But they hadn't done anything on the way back either, and Mihawk hadn't mentioned taking him out again either. Maybe Shanks really had managed to push the swordsman away, or maybe he'd simply realized how he deserved better than Buggy. He shook his head to clear it. No use dwelling on things he couldn't change. If Mihawk didn't want to see Buggy again, well, it would hurt, but he'd respect it. He was a grown man who could accept rejection. So, he asked, squashing his feelings and shoving them deep so he wouldn't look too disappointed when Mihawk left again. What's your next stop? He held his breath, waiting for the other to answer. I was hoping to visit a certain restaurant. The swordman answered with a thoughtful look. Buggy's heart hammered in his chest as he waited for him to continue. What do you say, Buggy the Clown? And there we go. So this was the one shot A Circus Makes For a Good Show by me, yours truly. I don't know what to ships and help. Honestly, I'm not sure on a scale of 1 to 10 how cringy it is to read your own fics, but it's written by me, for me, and so it will be read by me, for me. So, anyways, I have not done many of these, and English is not my first language, so if there's anything that's mispronounced, do feel free to let me know. And, anyways, I hope you have a wonderful night.